Build wealth and keep it like the Rockefellers. No matter how wealthy you get, if you can't make it stick around for yourself or for future generations, it's worthless. Look at the Vanderbilt family. They destroyed one of the most massive fortunes in the world because they didn't keep the wealth alive. You don't have to have tons of wealth to start practicing the techniques for keeping it, but without these techniques, you'll never build a lasting legacy of wealth. There's a quote, "Only the man who does not need it is fit to inherit wealth. The man who would make his own fortune no matter where he started. If an heir is equal to his money, it serves him. If not, it destroys him. But you look on and you cry that money corrupted him? Did it? Or did he corrupt his money?" That's from Atlas Shrugged. See, imagine one of your great-grandchildren presiding over your family fortune of millions of dollars. Imagine that whenever your great-grandchild receives a check to help him pay for education, or as a down payment for a first home, or to invest in a business, they give a toast to your memory. Your grandchild toasts to you because you started it all, right? You amassed wealth and left behind a set of values and a financial legacy to shepherd that wealth. By building a legacy of sustainable wealth, you create the path for your family to live wealthy. It's possible to create a family fortune that benefits generations after you. You can do this without creating trust fund babies, right? The people that they know how to spend money and pretty much little else. Instead, your wealth can be used to empower future generations. It can act as a launching pad for all of their endeavors, whether they're professional, academic, charitable, or entrepreneurial in nature. For real-world examples, we need to look to America's past. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, two of America's wealthiest businessmen amassed fortunes that were incredible beyond Bill Gates or Warren Buffett and Mark Zuckerberg combined. Their names? Cornelius Vanderbilt and John D. Rockefeller. And the story of what happened to their fortunes embodies a lesson for anyone planning to leave wealth for the next generation. The fortune of Cornelius Vanderbilt was made in the transportation business in the early 19th century. He switched from ships to trains, where he made his largest fortune yet in the railroad business, right? At his death in 1877, Vanderbilt's fortune was estimated to top 100 million, which was more than the US Treasury held at that time. That's pretty gangster, right? That's more than 200 billion in today's dollars. He lived a relatively modest life. He gave some money to charity. He donated $1 million to help start Vanderbilt University, and he also donated to churches. 95% of his fortune was passed on to his son, William Henry Vanderbilt, leaving his surviving wife and children to split the rest. William Henry Vanderbilt did well, doubling the family fortune before his death 9 years after the passing of his father. But that was the last time the Vanderbilt family fortune would actually grow. The Vanderbilt heirs became known as like wealthy socialites. And there were 10 Vanderbilt mansions built in Manhattan, just there alone. Without any new money coming in at all 10 mansions were torn down by the 1930s. A direct descendant of Cornelius died broke just 48 years after he did, because he failed to pass on a legacy of lasting wealth. Now, on the other hand, the fortune of John D. Rockefeller was made through selling oil and kerosene. He started the Standard Oil of Ohio in 1870, and by the end of the decade, his business was refining more than 90% of the oil in the US. He delivered the best oil at the cheapest price. He said, "We must ever remember, we're refining oil for the poor man, and he must have it cheap and good." So he pushed the price of oil down from 58 cents to 8 cents a gallon. The result was that Rockefeller became the richest man in American history. See, the New York Times said that Rockefeller's in 1937 obituary that he had amassed more than $1.5 billion. In today's dollars, the estimates would vary between somewhere like $243 billion and $341 billion. He was a prolific giver, donating more than $530 million of his fortune to charity during his lifetime. He also left $460 million to his son, John D. Rockefeller Jr. in 1917. Unlike the Vanderbilts, Jr. kept the family money together by creating a trust for each of his children. The bulk of the family fortune was managed by a group of financial professionals, which was called a family office. So a family office, there's a group of these financial professionals that only work for the Rockefellers. Now, today, if you're worth maybe like 200, probably more like $300 million, then you have enough wealth to start one for yourself. But you know what? There's a main way that almost everyone can benefit from the family office concept, and we'll talk about that here in a bit. See, at age 22, I went into New York City, and I was looking at this guy teaching, a pretty amazing $400 million strategy. And when he was doing it, the clients weren't even in the room. There's just all these financial professionals just sitting around a table. And I saw for the first time how due diligence really worked and what a family office benefit was. They were looking at vetting this and finding out what could go wrong and looking at the tax ramifications and how it should be owned. It was fascinating to me. Now, when I was writing my book, What Would the Rockefellers Do?, I got this call from a woman named Sheila. And she actually works for the Rockefeller family office. And she said that I was spot on with what I was talking about, wondered how I came to figure it out. So I interviewed her. She actually became a client of someone within our accredited network. And this is pretty fascinating because this is how it worked out for the Rockefeller family. They're now on to the 6th generation of wealth, using this family office still managing the fortune, which is estimated to be more than $10 billion. There's more than 150 Rockefellers currently receiving interest income from the family trust. And the family is said to donate as much as $50 million per year to charity, carrying on the senior Rockefellers' financial legacy of lasting wealth. There are 3 things you can do to follow the Rockefellers in building a legacy of wealth. 1 is to keep the money together. The wise financial planning that's empowered 6 generations of Rockefellers. What had happened? They empowered their children, their great-grandchildren, and their great-great-grandchildren by designing trusts that direct how the money can and cannot be spent. Part of their mantra is to own nothing but control everything. How do they do that? With estate planning and asset protection trusts. So an estate plan can be a will and a trust. An asset protection trust can shield that from other financial predators that want to come in and get that. So this is kind of the Rockefeller method. What they did is they used something that was called, it was by GE in the 1950s, kind of replicated this. It was called non-qualified deferred compensation. Non-qualified just means it's not a government qualified plan, right? It's just private. Deferred compensation is, hey, that money's going to be coming out sometime in the future. And so GE would go hire executives, and in order to keep those executives, promise them a pension, but the way they would fund the pension was buying life insurance. So they would buy life insurance on those executives. When that executive would die, it would replenish the money back to GE for the money they spent for the pension. So this is the same thing the Rockefellers do. They use life insurance by buying it on every single heir. Now what happens is, when that heir dies, it replenishes the money back to the trust, so now they can actually have their own family bank, and they can finance the interests of the Rockefellers, and then they can earn that interest within their trust rather than paying that to financial institutions. Pretty genius. Now the second thing you could do is you can pass on your values to the next generation so that your vision doesn't stop with you. See, I've changed my family's financial destiny by using this method and the financial strategy at the core that we just talked about. So how can you create money avenues that allow your children to pursue their goals without going into debt? There's something called a family legacy ring. The first one we've already talked about, which is the family office. The second one is what I call the family retreat, which is how you start to translate and transfer these values so you leave signposts for future generations. So my family was just in Guatemala. We sat down and we started talking about our family mission statement. We talked about, we signed up for a 5K as a family so that we could pursue a goal together that can kind of help bond us. We talked about what trips we wanted to do together. We talked about how we could support each other with the activities that we're up to. We talked about what each line of our values meant to us and how we were going to live those and what our rules were as a family. And then we planned out a trip for me and my oldest son to go to Asia, where I could take him to Cambodia and Vietnam and see what communism is like and do some service projects and see an entire different culture so the world feels smaller and he feels more connected to humanity and especially to me, so we can have these conversations. Now the third part of the family legacy ring is the family constitution. It's where you distill those values, you take those principles, and you put those signposts into a document that it's kind of like the preamble to your estate plan. So rather than legalese, it's your words saying we want this to happen in a dynamic way where we can create some board of advisors that does something more than just divide, distribute, and destroy money like the Vanderbilts. So this is how you invest in your heirs. You create rituals and traditions and even symbols like any great business would, but do that for your family. We have this great tradition right around the holidays, and it's crazy, but we just draw names and then we get to tease that person relentlessly through jokes or videos. We call it the family roast. You know, we have these family meetings so that we can talk about what's important in our lives and what we can do to be more connected and close, because that time of investment makes the difference. So I have a deal with my kids, right? I want to have them read books and do book reports. For example, Atlas Shrugged, which I started with a quote with Atlas Shrugged. If they read that, they do a book report, they can earn up to $10,000 for that. Because I look at education being beyond just schools, but more about these experiences that they can get from some of the classic readings. So how can you leave behind opportunity rather than just cash? How can you build a bank to earn interest rather than pay interest? How can you use a board of great people to advise future generations so your trust can become dynamic? I want to avoid creating a trust fund baby or an entitlement. Instead, I want to illuminate how my heirs can live their sole purpose, their values, their abilities, and their passions for a vision worthy of their life. If they don't have purpose, money will corrupt them. If they have purpose, it'll be a fuel for that. They're not going to be able to live lives of entitlement, or else they get cut off from this trust. But if they're going to be good stewards, then they can actually live a life of opportunity, and it can even look privileged, right, to the outside people. So the third piece is cash flow banking. We mentioned how GE used non-qualified deferred comp to buy life insurance and replenish it after that executive died, and the Rockefellers do that within their family. They use various forms of life insurance on all their heirs to replenish the trust. They can earn interest on the money that's accumulating in the cash value, and now it has safe storage, but it can also be utilized to invest in their heirs. That cash value is available before 59 and a half. It can replenish the money that's spent or any economic setbacks or losses, and it's available for opportunity when there's production, but it's not available for consumption. See, the Rockefellers have a family bank. Most of the world's out there scrimping and saving instead of investing their time and money into their family. Others are like the Vanderbilts. They become wealthy socialites and harm their heirs with money without stewardship. Yet others give it all away to charity because of guilt or shame. Now, it's great to give to charity, unless it's just simply because you didn't invest in your heirs. Look, some give it with strings, and along the way, while they're alive, they incentivize skill development. They do what the Rockefellers did, which is preserve, protect, and perpetuate that wealth. The Vanderbilts distributed, destroyed, and decimated a fortune. You can't shrink yourself to wealth. Instead, build a team who helps you avoid losing money. That's the family office. Capture most important insights, strategies, and family philosophies. That's the family constitution. And create a way to invest in your heirs. That's the family retreat. And tie all this together using the Rockefeller method with cash flow banking. That's cashflowbanking.com to see how you could do this for you. So you can set up a trust that allows any descendant to use that money for an entrepreneurial program, a mastermind program, or even a college education, for example. In order to access the money, they would write a plan to the board of the trust saying, I'd like to go to this college and it costs this much money. I'd like to borrow that money from the trust. It is, in essence, a family bank. No matter how wealthy you get, if you can't make it stick around for yourself or for future generations, it's worthless. Look at the Vanderbilt family. They destroyed one of the most massive fortunes in the world because they didn't keep the wealth alive. The rich do things completely differently by knowing the rules of the game and legally and ethically rigging them in their favor. Now, you have the knowledge to transform your thoughts into profits and build the life you love. If you're looking for more on this topic, check out my video on the 7 foundational pieces of how to create wealth. You'll learn how there's current ideas about how to make wealth that are totally backwards, and how you can start the best investments on the right path, bucking the system, and embracing the Rockefeller method. I'll see you there.